The memory hit me like a sudden beam of sunlight after days of rain, unexpected, blinding, and warm in a way that hurt. I hadn't thought of her in years. Not since the day life pulled us in different directions. Not since the day my father's last breath shook everything I believed in. Yet there she was, standing at the end of the old village road under the wide daylight sky, holding a faded photograph I thought she'd forgotten. And in that raw, trembling second, just before she spoke, my entire chest tightened as if time itself had folded back into our childhood. That's when she finally whispered the words I hadn't heard in decades. "You promised to marry me when we were kids. If you believe in the power of kindness, fate, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Touch of Kindness. It helps these stories reach more hearts like yours." Her voice echoed for a long moment before I found the strength to breathe again. I had come back to the village for one reason: to sell my father's small, broken house and return to the city where responsibilities didn't allow me to feel anything too deeply. I wasn't prepared for the sunlight in her eyes, or for the quiet heartbreak I didn't know she still carried. Her name was Arden, the girl who used to follow me through the fields with pockets full of wildflowers, claiming she'd marry me one day because I saved her from drowning in the river when we were 7. Back then, I laughed and promised because that's what kids do. I never imagined she'd remember, or that her life had taken a turn even sharper than mine. I stared at the photograph she held. It was of us sitting on a stone fence, barefoot, muddy, and young, her head leaning on my shoulder, her smile bright enough to light the whole valley. On the back was my childish handwriting. "When we're grown, I'll marry you, Arden. I promise." At that time, the world was simple. My mother was alive, my father still laughed, and dreams didn't feel dangerous. Now the adults we became were carrying scars deep under the skin. Arden still stood there in her pale yellow day dress, the breeze brushing her long dark hair sideways. She looked older, yes, but not defeated. Still, there was something behind her smile, a quiet exhaustion, like someone who had been holding up a collapsing roof alone for far too long. I asked her softly when she found that old picture, and she said she'd kept it in a small wooden box near her window, always believing I'd come back for it one day. Always believing maybe, just maybe, I'd come back for her. Her words carried no blame, only fragile hope. It made my heart twist. The day stretched warm and bright as she walked me through the village I once knew by heart. Children ran barefoot down the dusty path. Elders played cards under the banyan tree, and the scent of freshly baked flatbread drifted from the small bakery. Everything was the same. Everything was different. And as we passed the old fields where I used to race her, Arden told me how she had stayed to take care of her sick mother after her father abandoned them. She hadn't gone to college. She hadn't left the village. She worked in a small community clinic now, helping whoever came to her, no matter how little they could pay. She laughed lightly when she said life had made her grow up too fast. But the laugh didn't reach her eyes. We walked until we reached the river, the same river where I'd pulled her out as a child. The sun shimmered on the surface in wide ripples, and she stood on the bank, clutching that old photo, her voice trembling as she said she used to come here every time life felt too heavy. She said the river reminded her of me, strong when needed, gentle when calm. I didn't know how to respond. I'd spent years drowning in my own storms, never once imagining someone remembered me as strength. It wasn't until she exhaled shakily and mentioned she was engaged once, long ago, but the man disappeared days before their wedding, leaving her with debts he secretly took under her name, that I finally understood the exhaustion behind her smile. The world hadn't been kind to her. Not one bit. Yet she still stood in the sunlight, still offering kindness wherever she could, still believing old promises might mean something. And that broke something open in me. I didn't recognize the man I'd become in the city. I worked non-stop to survive. I lived alone. I didn't trust easily. I didn't hope easily. But being around Arden, hearing the cracks in her story, the courage in her voice, reminded me who I used to be before loneliness hardened parts of me into stone. We spent hours talking under the daylight sky until shadows stretched long across the ground. She told me how the village clinic was struggling and how she feared it might close soon. She told me she sometimes thought she wasn't meant to be loved, that maybe the river kept saving her because life wanted her to stay even when she didn't understand why. And all I could think was how deeply wrong she was. I told her I remembered everything too, how she used to patch up every scrape on my knees, how she used to bring food from her home when my father worked late and forgot dinner, how she used to believe I could become anything, even when I couldn't see past my own fear. I admitted I had been too scared to come back sooner, not because I forgot her, but because life had broken me in ways I didn't know how to explain. I had lost people I loved. I had built walls so high even I couldn't climb over them. But standing with her again made those walls crumble. We didn't talk about the promise at first, not directly. It was too heavy, too soaked in memories and pain and hope all tangled together. But there were moments she looked at me with a question in her eyes, one she didn't dare ask, and moments I looked back at her with an answer I wasn't ready to voice. As the daylight softened into warm gold, she walked me back to my father's house. It was old, cracked around the edges, the paint peeling like tired skin. Inside, dust coated everything. My father had lived his final months in loneliness, and guilt pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. I told her I planned to sell it, start over. She looked around quietly, then gently picked up a small wooden carving my father made years ago. She wiped the dust off and placed it carefully on the table, saying homes weren't meant to be abandoned, only repaired. Her voice was so soft, it felt like a stitch healing something torn. We spent the next morning cleaning the house together under the bright daylight streaming through the windows. She swept while I fixed broken hinges. She hummed old childhood tunes while dusting the shelves. Slowly, the house started breathing again. And so did I. Neighbors stopped by, surprised to see me back. They spoke warmly of Arden, how she helped the elderly, how she bought groceries for families when she knew they were struggling, how she once stayed awake all night caring for a sick child whose parents couldn't afford a hospital visit. She was the heartbeat of this place, the kind of person who gave and gave even when her own heart was running on empty. By noon, I realized something painfully clear. Arden had spent her whole life keeping the world together for everyone else. No one had ever done the same for her. Later, while we rested on the front steps,